a short story written by Rabindranath Tagore, and the title of this particular story is My Lord the Baby. This story is divided into two parts. In the first part of this particular story, we meet a 12-year-old boy whose name is Raicharan. He lives in a village, and in order to get work, he decides to move to a city. When he comes to a city, he was employed as a servant by his master. He belonged to the same caste as his master and was given his master's little son to nurse. So one of the richest persons employs Raicharan as a servant because he belonged to the same caste as his master, and his master gives him the work to look after his little son. So Raicharan becomes the private servant of his master's son Anukul. Since his childhood till he got married, he serves as the personal attendant of Anukul. Now Anukul, after completion of his education, enters the judicial services. Now when he gets married and begets a son, when Anukul gets married and begets a son, he makes Raicharan the servant of his new son, the little master. Raicharan enjoys his work. He spends most of his time with the baby. He finds great pleasure in the child. As and when the baby starts to walk, the little baby trying to walk, the moment Raicharan saw it, he felt overjoyed. Raicharan tells his mistress, that is, the mother of the little master, that one day the little master would become a judge. As the baby grows up, the father, that is Ankul, buys a small go-kart for his son. He also buys silk clothes and ornaments for his son. Since he was a very rich man, he bought a go-kart, silk clothes and ornaments for his son, the little master. The baby used to call him Chana. The baby used to call Raicharan as Chana. About this time, Ankul gets himself transferred to a district on the banks of the river Padma. Since Ankul was working in the judicial department, he was transferred from one place to another place. At this particular time, he was transferred to a district which was situated on the banks of the river Padma. As it happens during rainy season, one afternoon when rain stopped, Raicharan puts the little master in the cart and pulls him down to the river bank. When they come near the river bank, the boy saw a tree, Kadamba tree, and there were a lot of flowers, and he demands the flowers. Since it was muddy out there, he did not want to go there to bring the flowers. As you know very well, it was a rainy season, so there was a lot of mud out there. That's why Raicharan tries to avoid going there to bring the flowers. So he tries to divert the attention of the boy by showing him the birds in the opposite direction. So Raicharan does not want to go there to bring those flowers, so he tries his level best to divert the attention of the boy by showing him the birds in the opposite direction, but the boy was not ready to listen to him. He insists, and that's the reason he decides to grow and bring some flowers. Before going, he instructs the baby to sit in the cart and not to go near the water. As he goes to bring the flowers, unfortunately, the baby gets excited by the river waves. So he gets down from the cart and toddles off towards the river. So the baby is moving towards the river. Now here, Raicharan, after plucking some handful of flowers, returns to the cart to find the baby was missing. After plucking some flowers, when he comes back, he finds that there was no baby in the cart. He was shocked to see the empty cart. Raicharan is very shocked. He shouts, "Master, master, little master." When Raicharan does not turn up, the mistress gets anxious. At home, the mother of the little master, she gets very anxious because it was evening and still Raicharan has not returned. So she sends her servants to search the baby. Now the mistress has sent some servants and they are in search of that little baby, but they could not find the baby. They could only find Raicharan rushing up and down the fields, shouting desperately, "Master, master, little master." Now, when they come home, the master and the mistress, they question him, they question Raicharan about the child. But he tells them that he knows nothing. Now, everyone was of the opinion that the baby might have drowned in the river water and died. But the mother, the mistress, she suspects that Raicharan might have stolen the child, possibly to sell it to the gypsies, because it was rumored that the gypsies were in that area at the same time. She even offers him all the money she had if he gives her the child. The mother of the little master, she offers him all the money she had. She tells Raicharan, "Look, I'll give you all the money I have, just give me my baby." When he says that he does not know anything, the mistress orders him to get out of the house. So there ends the first part of the story. So in the first part of the story, we meet Raicharan, who works as a personal attendant or a servant in a rich man's house. Anukul, he looked after Anukul, and when he grew up and got married, he looked after his son. But there was an accident as the Raicharan and the little master, they go to the river bank. The baby goes missing. In fact, it is believed that the baby might have drowned in the river water. Now, in the second part of the story, we see Raicharan returns to his village. Now, his wife, who had no hope of begetting a child, bears him a son and dies. When Raicharan returns to his village, he was living with his wife. She was a middle-aged woman and there was no hope that she would beget a child. But fortunately, she gives birth to a son and she dies immediately. Raicharan's widowed sister names him as Failna. Raicharan had a widowed sister, she was living with him, so she names this little baby as Failna. In the beginning, Raicharan feels an intense resentment towards the child. So, after the birth of that particular child, the father, he should have loved his baby. He should have enjoyed the birth of his only son. But he has an intense anger towards the child because he was having that feeling of guilt in his mind. Rai Charan was thinking that he was responsible for the death of the little master. He feels extremely guilty at the prospect of being happy about his own child in the aftermath of such a great tragedy. He held himself responsible for the death of the little master. That's why he was not ready to accept his own son as his son and be happy. Had his widowed sister not taken care of the baby, it would not have lived long. Fortunately, Rai Charan's widowed sister took care of the baby, and that's why it was able to survive. But soon his attitude towards his son changes. As the baby grows up, Raicharan's attitude towards his son changes. As the baby begins to talk and say Baba, Mama with baby accent, he finds the similarities between his son and the little master. Still, Raicharan thinks of the little master. So, as his own son starts to talk with baby accent, Baba and Mama, he finds the similarities. He thinks that his son and the little master are the same. Gradually, he grows affectionate and loving towards his son. He felt as if he was with little master. He thinks that the little master might have taken a rebirth in his house. But still, if we just look at Raicharan, he was still filled with feeling of guilt about the loss of little master. Towards the end of the story, we see Raicharan begins to spoil Failna just as Ankul did with the little master. Here we can see these two fathers, Ankul on one side and Raicharan on the other side. Ankul was rich, Raicharan is poor. But Raicharan buys a go-kart, yellow satin waistcoat and a gold embroidered cap for his son. He melts down the ornaments of his dead wife and makes golden bangles and anklets for his son. As Ankul spent lot of money on his son, similarly here we see Raicharan spends a lot of money on his son. He even does not allow him to play with any one of the neighborhood. He does not allow his son to play with other children of the neighborhood. Now, as the baby grows up, in order to send him to a very fine school, he sells his small piece of land and decides to go to Calcutta. Raicharan wants to give his son the best education. That's why he decides to sell his small piece of land and then he decides to go to Calcutta. There he wants to work as a servant. He goes in search of the work, and with great difficulty he was able to get an employment as a servant. In the meantime, 12 years pass. By this time, his son was able to read and write. His son was very bright, healthy, and good looking. Whenever Raicharan visited his son's hostel, because Raicharan's son was living in hostel, whenever Raicharan visited his son's school, his classmates seemed to be amused by his country manners. Since Raicharan was illiterate, his classmates, that is Failna's classmates, they were very much amused by his country manners. They could not believe that such a very beautiful, very elegant Failna could have a father like Raicharan. But all students loved Raicharan for his innocence and kindness. There is a typographical error here. In the meantime, Failna asked for more money. As I already told you, Raicharan has given everything to his child, to his son. Whatever he demanded, he supplied. So naturally, Failna asked for more and more money. Now Raicharan has grown old and his employer was not happy with his work. He was very weak physically. So one day he decides to visit Baraset, the city where Ankul was working as a magistrate. So as he has grown old, his master was not happy with his work and Failna was asking for more money. So one day he decides to go to Baraset. It's a city where Ankul was working as a magistrate. When he goes and meets the family, he tells them, he tells them that it was not the Padma that stole your baby, it was I. He tells them that it was he who stole the child and he had kept him all along with him and now he wants to hand over Failna to them. Ankul was very suspicious of the claim he made because there was no proof that Failna was the little master. But his wife accepts the child wholeheartedly, believing that he was her own son. In fact, Raicharan wanted to stay with them. He requests Ankul to allow him to stay with them. So Raicharan wanted that Ankul should allow him to stay with them as a servant, but Ankul did not allow him to stay there. According to him, Raicharan has committed an unforgivable crime, and that's why he cannot stay with them. When Raicharan requests him again and again, Tailna tells his new father to forgive him. He also tells him that if he does not allow him to stay with them, he should give him a small monthly pension. When Raicharan hears his son's remarks, he was shocked. He felt desperate and helpless. He decides not to stay there. He just leaves their house dejected and disappointed, saying nothing. At the end of the month, Ankul sends some money to Raicharan's village, but we come to know that there was no one there of the name Raicharan. There ends the story. Now, this story, as you know very well, is written by Tagore and it is taken from his collected stories. In this story, the writer tells us about sacrifice, guilt, responsibility, gratitude, letting go, selflessness, and shame. These are some of the themes that the writer talks about. The story is narrated in the first person by an unnamed narrator. Through this story, the writer is trying to explore the theme of sacrifice. Raicharan, who was living with the guilt of feeling responsible for his master's son's death, gives his only son to his master. This is the greatest sacrifice he did. Since Raicharan was a poor man, perhaps he might have thought that his son could have everything the best if he stays with Ankul. So here we see Raicharan is willing to sacrifice his own needs for his son. In fact, Raicharan is an old man. He needs support. But at this particular time, he hands over his own son to Ankul, telling them that he is the little master. So here he sacrifices his own needs. So Raicharan is a kind-hearted person. He would never commit a mistake. He could never do wrong thing. He is always prepared to sacrifice his own happiness, thinking that his master and mistress would be happy. So for the sake of the happiness of his master and the mistress, he was ready to suffer in his life. Here we see Raicharan, his decision, his attitude towards his son. He is trying to get rid of his sense of guilt that he was responsible for the death of his master's son. So he has that sense of guilt, aparadik manobhava. He was always blaming himself for the death of his master's son. So the end of the story is very interesting. It is very surprising to see his son's reaction to his new life as the son of the master. Failna was living with Raicharan. Now when he comes to know that Raicharan is not his father, Anukul is his new father, his attitude towards Raicharan changes completely. He disregards Raicharan to be his father. Based on the simplicity of Raicharan, he never believed that Raicharan was his real father. So, since his childhood, perhaps Failna used to think that Raicharan could not be his father. Raicharan's son neither understands all the sacrifices that Raicharan has made for him, nor does he understand the final sacrifice that Raicharan makes. If you just go back in time, you'll see how Raicharan treats his son. He was ready to spend money for fulfilling all his needs. He gave him everything he needed. Though he was not rich, still he bought a go-kart for him, ornaments for him. He took admission in a very good school. He gave him very good education. It is certainly one of the greatest sacrifices that he makes by giving his only son away to somebody else under the guise that they are his real parents. So this is one of the greatest sacrifices that a father can make. He is giving away his own son to somebody else under the guise that they are his real parents. Towards the end of the story, Raicharan is never seen again. He is seen lonely and defeated, roaming from village to village, wandering from village to village. He still blames himself for the death of his master's son. So that sense of guilt is always haunting him. All who really owe a debt of gratitude to Raicharan live happily, and he is left alone as an outcast. Unfortunately, the master, the mistress, even Failna, they owe a debt of gratitude. They should have been grateful to Raicharan, but unfortunately, they did not show any sense of gratitude. They are living happily, and Raicharan is left alone as an outcast. We really feel pity for him because still he blames himself for that incident he was not responsible for. Unfortunately, Raicharan still